Hello. Before we begin the podcast, I would like to acknowledge that False Dichotomy is recorded on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, and that we recognize and uphold the significance of the Dish with One Spoon Covenant. We acknowledge that this land is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, and we respect and honor their relationship with this land. We are grateful for the Indigenous people who are stewards of this land and have taken care of this area for thousands of years. As we conduct our research or create art, we are grateful for the opportunity to use these lands and recognize and appreciate the historic and ongoing relationship our Indigenous neighbors have with this land. We promise to honor and respect these lands and the Indigenous people who call them home, and to always continue to learn and work towards reconciliation. Thank you for listening.
So hello, everybody, and welcome to the third episode of False Dichotomy. For those new to the series, I'm your host, Sam Maduros. I'm a wildlife biologist and bioinformatician, as well as a writer, actress, and general theater person. In this podcast, we bring together scientists and artists to showcase how fun and approachable science can be, and also how important and valuable art is, as well as to discover new ways to communicate science using art. So the theme for this episode is grad school. I'm a graduate student myself, and I'm currently doing my master's in bioinformatics at the University of Guelph, where I focus on developing programming pipelines to help answer questions related to Arctic ecology. So grad school certainly has its challenges, whether you're a science major or an arts major, and a lot of exciting work is being done by master students. So on this episode, we have two wonderful science master students and two amazing art master students. So our first guest is Madison Arsenault. Maddie is doing her master's in science in pathobiology at the Ontario Veterinary College here at the University of Guelph. Our next guest is Nadine Ibrahim. Nadine is doing her Master's of Science in Bioinformatics, also at the University of Guelph, and we're actually part of the same lab. Now we'll jump over to the artists. So first we have Graham Mcclelland. Graham is doing his Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Writing at the University of Guelph-Humber. And last but definitely not least, we have Jess Bertrand. Jess is doing her Master's of Arts in Expanded Media at the Darmstadt University of Applied Science in Germany. So hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
So welcome to the podcast. I'm excited to jump into things. Before we do, I'll just recap briefly how the podcast works. So we'll spend some time talking to each scientist and artist about the work they do and the areas of their fields that they're passionate about. And then at the end, they'll have some time to work together to create a new way to communicate the science that we discussed using the skills of the artists. So this could be a pitch for a play, an art piece, something musical, really just anything you can think of. So Maddie, do you want to start us off?
Sure, I'd love to.
So first off, would you mind telling us a bit about what work you're doing, what your master's is kind of focused around?
Yep, definitely. So I am in the Department of Pathobiology here at Guelph. And my project focuses a lot on bioinformatics. So I'm studying the microbiome in pigs. And microbiome are all of the little kind of bacteria that live inside and on pigs. So I'm looking at little baby piglets and how the bacteria kind of develops on them and starts growing on them. And then whether the bacteria that's on them kind of will impact their growth later in life. So obviously to do that, you use a lot of computing. So my whole project is on computers. And yeah, it's been pretty good so far. Before I started my master's, I didn't know how to code. And now I've started coding and it's super interesting.
Yeah, that's awesome. What has that learning curve been like, kind of learning to code and figuring that out?
I'm still on the learning curve, definitely. Yeah, I was really nervous. I feel like in undergrad, I didn't really get a good introduction into coding. And then when I started my master's, I was slightly nervous. I didn't fully commit to the bioinformatics. That's why I'm in pathobiology. But I thought it was a good opportunity to start learning about how to code. I also, quite honestly, I thought it would give me a leg up when I started applying to jobs. But the learning curve has been it's been approachable. You definitely have to put work in. And I think every day I'm still learning, but it's nice to kind of be on the learning path with other people so you can bounce ideas off of other people and kind of learn from other people's coding styles. So yeah, it's approachable. You can do it. It's a lot of work, and you keep learning every single day, which is one of the reasons why I like it.
I feel like approachable is such a like tactful word to use. Like, it's like it was pause approachable.
Yeah. Well, I was so scared to learn. Like in undergrad, the only experience I have is just like so difficult, and learning how to like crack code is hard. So yeah, I feel like everyone's just scared to do it, especially when you're a biologist. You're kind of scared to learn how to code, but anyone can do it. It's just you just have to put your mind to it.
It's like learning a new language as well. Like I did like a very small project where I used a platform called Twinery. It's just like narrative storytelling with just lots of link branches. And even that, like I copied and pasted everything. So I was like, I cannot write this on my own. How do I do anything? And then it just became like someone else must have thought of this before me. And it's like, oh, thank goodness, because I don't know what to do from here. So that's my like minimal experience of trying, but it was definitely limited. I never went too far with it afterwards.
Yeah, no, I've definitely found that as well in undergrad. They don't really, I feel like they show you R and they just kind of let you do, they don't explain it that well, I found as well. So I definitely took like a crash course before getting into it in my master's to like understand what was happening at all.
Yeah. My first couple classes.
Are you taking a course in coding, or are you self-taught?
I took some courses when I first started. I took 2 courses, I think, when I first started to learn a little bit. And then from there, you just kind of pull the code that you need or the coding skills that you need from those courses. And then you kind of deep dive into other resources. So the course taught a lot about how to like access resources and even just introducing you to a coding language so you know what's out there and like how to access tools. And then once you know the tools you need, then you kind of have to dive into them more by yourself.
Google and the internet is like your best friend as you're coding anything. Because if you have a problem, somebody else also has probably had that problem, and there's something out there to help you figure it out and dive into a bit more, or at least like what packages to use and things like that too.
And I almost feel like undergrad students aren't as best supported in most institutions, or at least the institutions I've been at, mainly because there's so many of them. A lot of them are there just because they have to, because, you know, the system we have is that you need an undergrad to get any kind of meaningful job. And so once you're a master's student, I almost feel like the resources are better available, or at least I'm in fewer classes, so I can dedicate more time to picking up new skills. So that's kind of a benefit I've had in the master's. As busy as I am, I've still had more time than in undergrad, where I'm trying to juggle 4 or 5 classes. Now I'm just trying to juggle 2. And yes, the demand is higher, but there's still more time in the day, and I can figure out, like, I don't have to be physically on campus in the classroom more. So I don't know, maybe that's just also a difference. Maybe there's just more resources available for master's students. I don't know. It's not that kind of podcast.
I think that's fair too. You do have more time as a master's student to focus on the things, I guess, that are really relevant to you or that you're really interested in. So you can deep dive into stuff like coding or other skill sets without being distracted by maybe like another course that's required but isn't super needed for your work specifically. So kind of how did you get involved with the pathobiology route and like looking at microbiomes? Like what was kind of your journey to that project?
I love to talk about this. So perfect. In undergrad, I am a massive ecology nerd, and like I love to just go outside and like look at bugs and look at trees. So in undergrad, I focused a lot on ecology and evolution and wildlife biology. And then I also found myself, I took a lot of electives in immunology and microbiology, which they all are biology, but they're very different fields. Immunology is kind of more, human and medical and like how your body reacts to disease. So then I wanted to try merging the 2 interests. So disease, immunology, and wildlife. So I looked around for different master's programs, and there was a couple on bird disease that I was interested in. So I emailed a couple profs at the OVC. And also, I kind of knew that I wanted to study at the OVC because the Ontario Vet College is kind of where you go to study animal disease. So I got in contact with the prof, and then she actually set me up with a kind of a group interview with 3 other profs at the Ontario Vet College, and they all pitched ideas to me. And this was actually kind of the first time that bioinformatics was pitched to me, and I didn't really ever think about doing bioinformatics before. I just wanted to study animals and disease. And then this prof said, I have a bioinformatics project that you could work on. It involves pigs, but it's pig disease and pig microbiome. So it's a little bit different, but I think you'd be a good fit for it because you have a good background in immunology and like animal physiology and stuff. So yeah, I never thought I'd be working on pigs. I'm not a huge agriculture person. Like I've like tickled in vegetarianism and veganism. So I don't love pigs, but I really love the bioinformatics, and I love like pigs impact like human health, pigs impact wildlife health. And they're kind of like vectors for disease. So I find that really interesting. Yes, Graham?
Also, I've heard that pigs, like in studying pigs, there are a lot of similarities that can be drawn with humans. Now, is that just kind of like an old wives' tale that I've heard, or are there actual like parallels between pigs and humans?
There's a lot of parallels. So pigs, like pig organs can be transplanted into humans, which is like very similar. Their digestive tract is pretty much the exact same. Their hearts are pretty much the same size. I think it has to do with size and their like physiology. So yeah, pigs are really close to humans. So I guess my work can also be translated into like human research, but yeah, bioinformatics came to me. I didn't seek it out. And yeah, I like animals and I like disease. And I feel like this is a good bridge of them.
Yeah, that's awesome that you found something that kind of like works with all the different interests and things like that.
And you get to hang out with like baby pigs. That sounds like a pretty cool job.
Yeah, I didn't collect any of the data. I just basically walked in and they said, here's a chip with data on it. You can have it. And then they told me how it was collected.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah.
See, when I heard like studying microbiome, I think of like studying feces, like to see all the like bacterial composition of the intestine. Like I know that's how they do it in humans. It's like so when you're like collecting the data, I'm just picturing like poop.
I read a book.
That's it.
Data.
I read a book somewhere that like described like during the pandemic, it was about describing how like disease and bacteria like in like I think it's like I don't know, like in like big feces of like I don't know, I think of like a pool of feces for pigs and animals on a farm where it can actually be quite toxic, and that if you just let it sit, the bacteria so many times like it's actually really intelligent, and then that like shows how people something of showing like how viruses and these kinds of parts of like your body they can be really, really smart and evolving. And it, like something along the lines of comparing it to like some kind of computer system that like this would be much more advanced in a way of just letting natural processes be rather than just a computer generated program. But that's like all I know. So you can tell me if that sounds accurate or not.
Yeah. So Graham, I was trying to look cool, but I do study pig poop. It's straight up pig samples. My profs collected the pig's poop samples and processed them before I got there. But yeah, it's fully pig poop.
Well, you still look cool.
For science.
Yeah. And yeah, it sounds like not glamorous, but if you think about like in one scoop of poop, there's like 1 million bacteria living there. So you can think bacteria are organisms, right? So, I mean, you could conceptually think of a bacteria as an animal, right? So it's an ecosystem with like 1 million different organisms in it. And these million organisms, they all interact with each other, but it's on such a micro level that we actually can't see how they're interacting. So if we go into a forest, we can see like moose and bears and wolves interacting and kind of figure out what relies on what, so we can figure out food chains and system interactions and how an ecosystem reacts to stress, or how an ecosystem reacts to one species being eliminated. But within a microbiome, because it's inside of like a pig's stomach, we can't actually see it, and it's too small. We can't like observe it. So my research is really like digging in to find out like who is even there, like what organisms are even present. And the field's kind of not at the place yet where we can figure out the interactions that are going on. But bacteria are, I guess you could say, smart. Like they cross talk a lot, and they can like interact and transfer their genes to each other. So if you did, like, just to go off what you were saying, if you did leave like a pot of poop, like bacteria would talk to each other, and they could like transfer their genes and like outcompete each other. Like there is a whole ecosystem interacting in there. We just don't see it and don't think about it.
Wow.
So you look at poop and see poop, but I look at poop and see like an ecosystem.
Wow.
And
That
see,
just
that's
puts
what
into
makes it so
perspective.
cool.
Just makes you think of how much that we just don't see in the world, that is just creating its own universes and environments that is just like too small for the human eye. It's pretty cool.
And I guess it's also interesting, like in bioinformatics, like we talk about big data a lot, but like a lot of the time big data comes from really small things. So like all of my study organisms are little tiny bacteria, but the amount of data I have on my computer is just incomprehensible. Like my computer just crashes whenever I try and see my data. So it's interesting how like big data comes from these really small little organisms. Yeah, microbiology, but big data.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, for sure. A lot of like the things we have the most data on are like the smaller things, or even like insects and things like that too. That's huge amounts. The bigger things, even though we can see them, are sometimes harder to study.
Yeah, definitely.
So we will do one more question. So a lot of people have interest both in arts and in science. So are there any arts you're involved with or that you really love?
I wish. I'm so not an artist. Like the field of art, like I love consuming art. I love consuming all kinds of art. But yeah, actually creating art, all of it seems really difficult to me, and I've never actually like tried to create any kind of art. I just am more of a consumer. So yeah, there's no art that I'm particularly involved with except singing in the shower.
Well, that counts, I think.
Yeah, that's still good.
Thanks. I'm a self-taught singer.
Exactly. Own it.
Yeah. What kind of art do you like to consume then?
Definitely I like music. I listen to a lot of music. But I also really, really like theater. Like I really enjoy going to like productions and stuff. And all throughout like high school and undergrad, I would attend like any theater show I could. And it was really weird because in high school, obviously, like I didn't participate in putting on any of the plays, but anytime the theater group put on a play, I would always attend. And like, yeah, I love consuming theater. I love being in a theater, and like I think what actors do and directors and producers and whatever, so cool. I can never do it. I think it's so interesting. Awesome. Yeah. So yeah, theater's probably my favorite one, but I don't consume it as often as I consume music.
Love to hear that.
Yeah, you're in the right crowd to say that, I think. Okay, so we will jump over to our next scientist, Nadine.
Hi.
So can you tell me a little bit about what you're working on and the research you're doing?
Sure. So I'm also in bioinformatics. My kind of focus is more on like machine learning and working with that to kind of be able to detect errors in DNA. So for my project, I'm looking at like 5 different machine learning algorithms and looking at different animal groups to work with, looking at like a barcode, which is kind of like an identifier that can identify like what the animal species is. And with sequencing, sometimes they create errors when they're sequenced. So I want to see if like machine learning algorithms can be able to detect that. So I'm just looking at a few and kind of looking at it's kind of more just like an exploratory approach where I'm like just seeing like which are better than others, and like looking at also like some animal groups have more data than others, so obviously that takes into account which is better. So just kind of exploring it and seeing overall like what is the outcome of it all.
Can you explain a bit more about what like machine learning is and like the algorithms you're kind of using?
Sure, yeah. So I mean, I kind of came into this as like kind of a beginner. So like I wasn't an expert in bioinformatics or machine learning at all. I kind of entered this master's kind of to learn about it. So with me, kind of, I use more packages that have machine learning algorithms that you can use, and then use it with your data. So it's not like I'm actually creating these algorithms myself or like coding them. That's something that maybe like an engineer would do or someone who's like a computer scientist would do. But yeah, so like often when you hear machine learning, it's it's kind of like a buzzword. People who use it, like me, who are kind of just using packages, we're not coding that stuff. We're kind of just using it, tweaking things within it, and using it with our data to kind of work with it. But yeah, it's kind of like a very small percentage of people who really kind of like code machine learning algorithms and things like that. I guess you could say it's kind of like math. Like they kind of just it's algorithms that kind of work with data in a way that kind of can figure out patterns in it and things like that. And each algorithm is different in the way that it works and different sort of functions that it works with. And that's kind of, I guess, if I simplify that explanation of it. I'm sorry, I'm coughing a lot. I'm a little sick, so that's why I was a little bit on mute because I kept coughing every year.
Yeah, that's okay. No worries. And yeah, that's for sure a nicer thing about, yeah, like the packages and stuff that are available. Is that even, because I definitely don't do any of the behind the scenes. I used a little bit of machine learning in mine too, and I don't do any of the in-depth stuff. It's just like using what other people have done, which is very nice that other people have done it.
Yeah, there's a lot of packages, especially in Python, I guess. So like if you want to get into like machine learning, Python is a great language to learn for that. R is, I guess, more for statistics. A lot of biologists use it. It's really great for creating like amazing figures and stats and things like that. But I'd say Python is a lot better for like the machine learning stuff for sure.
Oh. So do you use like a mix of Python and R for your project, or?
Yeah, so I use R, I guess, mostly for kind of working with the data filtering and like creating a data set that's good to work with, and then I move over to Python and then use that data set that I made in R to kind of work with the machine learning algorithms. And everything kind of becomes like repetitive in a way. Like once you kind of have like your main code down, it's a lot of just kind of like repeating processes and tweaking little things here and there. But and that's kind of one of the fun things about it, is like once you kind of have most of like your hard like coding work done, it's a lot of it's just like running pipelines, and it's very simple from there, and then just kind of analyzing your data.
Are you looking at any particular like taxa or groups or anything for your project, or is it kind of just the pipeline designed to be more broad across?
Yeah, so for mine, I'm working with 3. So there's tardigrades, Echinodermata, and I forgot which one. I'm like looking at one currently, but I forgot what the name of it was. But yeah, I picked 3 randomly, and that's kind of what I'm working with. At the end of the day, it's just looking at the DNA of it. But yeah, so those are 3 that I'm working with, and yeah, what kind of guided me in the direction of bioinformatics was like in undergrad I also did research, but it was more in kind of like a wet lab setting. So you call like bioinformatics dry lab, and then like when you work in like a lab with like, you know, the typical lab with like chemicals and things like that would be like your wet lab. But yeah, it wasn't really for me. I found that everything was very slow, and I just, a lot of the like lab techniques and things like that, like you'd mess it up and it was like a month of work and you had to redo it. So that's kind of what appealed to me about learning bioinformatics, is kind of like being able to kind of work with stuff more efficiently and gathering data more quickly and things like that. But yeah, and there's also like similar to Maddie, like, almost like a vegetarian, vegan type of person. So I knew that if I was going to continue in the research path of like wet labs, I would have to eventually work with animals. And like, I saw like some of the stuff that like graduate students had to work with like mice and things like that. And I'm like, that's not really for me. I can't do that. So that's kind of what got me in the direction of coding.
Jess's eyes say everything right now. They just like went wide in that way that you do. I've noticed that. And it's just like, it's such a different world for us artists.
It's completely hearing you talking about coding and animals. I'm just like, I have no idea. And I when you're like, oh, when people in undergrad like study animals, I'm like, what do you mean they look at? And I don't know. I have no idea.
Yeah,
but I'm glad
the first time I ever like met my advisor in undergrad for like the lab I was working with, like the first thing I remember was like some girl coming up. She's just like, okay, so we're gonna sacrifice the mouse now. And I was like, oh my god, like people are just killing mice in this lab. Yeah, so I don't know. You see a lot of weird stuff like that, and I was like, this is not for me. Like I guess I recognize the importance of it, but it's just not for me. Like I can't do this.
The only thing I have in my head is like those high school like science classes and movies where they're dissecting frogs, and like I think there was at some point like some science thing where they had like the eye of a horse, and I was like, no thanks. And that was like I knew science wasn't for me, and seeing that I was like, this makes me sad.
Yeah, it is pretty cool though. I've dissected the eye of a horse before. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
I think if you have like a technical understanding of things, then I think it maybe takes away from maybe the gore of it, where you just come at it from like an eye of understanding rather than it being something like more gruesome, I guess. I think I guess it just depends on the perspective you come from.
Yeah, it definitely depends on like positionality and stuff. Like we're being like a student at the OVC, obviously it's a veterinarian college. So a lot of the folks that work there are vets. But unfortunately, a part of being a vet and a part of learning, like you do have to sacrifice animals sometimes. And that's not to say that it doesn't come with like a massive amount of ethics. Like they're not sacrificing animals for no reason. Like there has to be a good reason why you're doing this. And a lot of the times, yeah. It's still sad. It's still very, very sad to think about, but it really comes down to like positionality and like your ability to think about what purposes is this animal serving, and like is it worth it, and like being super respectful of the life of the animal while you're conducting the research on it. Like I don't think that's like one thing all biologists have in common is we're never ever disrespectful to animals. Like most of us love animals. So there's this huge amount of respect for all animals in biology, even like the tiniest like copepods, like little small shrimps. Like we still respect them, and that's like a big idea that's in the lab always.
Is there a point where like there are moments where if like an animal is suffering, is there a point where they use animals that are like they take samples from things like that are like to save them from suffering, you and then you use that for science? Or I don't know, I'm just curious.
So my yes, to answer your question, one of my advisors, he's a post-mortem veterinarian, so post-mortem is after death. And so he kind of leads the dissections from my understanding at OVC. And all the animals that they use for dissections, they're not sacrificed animals. They're animals who have died from other causes. So if a random person who owns a horse has a horse who's passed away, then they'll transport it to the OVC so that it can be used for dissection. So it's kind of like donating a body for science. There are some times like where there's other research going on and they're trying to, for example, in pigs, they try to like infect them with certain bacteria so that they can study an infected pig. And sometimes, unfortunately, when the pig gets infected, it passes away. So those pigs they would then use for dissections. Yeah.
I see.
So it's not like we're just going to sacrifice a pig to dissect it. The only dissections that are done are on like animals that have died from natural causes.
I see. Okay, yeah. It kind of reminds me, have any of you heard of like Body Worlds? I don't know if you know. Okay, because like I went to the one in Germany, so it's like Kolpavetten. And it's basically people donate their bodies for science, and it's literally like it goes through like a rigorous process of like going through like you basically plasticify. You get plasticified, you get like anyway, it's a whole thing, but it's basically a whole museum where you just get to see like actual body parts of people like in different positions, and it explains like it shows you like, you know, the lungs of someone who has smoked and who hasn't, and like just the differences of it's very, very interesting and goes into like what people will do for science and like understanding the human body. So it kind of reminds me of like giving respect to the people who have chosen to like give their bodies for science in a way that like will help humanity understand themselves better in a way.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's not like always like the most, I guess, fun part of science to think about stuff like that. But in order to understand some of the more physiology or like effects of diseases and stuff like that, you do have to have some element sometimes of like working with real animals and things. But there's always like a lot of ethics, a lot of forms, a lot of like paperwork. It's not like taken lightly. Like Maddie said, a lot of like respect for the organisms.
And I think that's really important to communicate, and like as you talked about like how important it is for scientists to have like venues of communication so things are like easily understood by people. I think actually talking about these things, even though they're uncomfortable, is actually really beneficial because it kind of takes away the mystique of the word scientist. For people who are like, oh, scientist, I don't know, like there's so much in the pandemic that people have been like, oh, I don't know, what do I know, what is true, or all these things. So it's kind of nice to like have open conversations about things, to like hear about like ethics boards and these things of like huge respect for animal life, because it kind of brings a lot of just, I don't know, it opens the doors for things to not kind of like destigmatize the mystery or mystique of these things that most people don't know on a regular day basis.
I think like a transparency and stuff is always really important in science too, like making sure people understand like fully what your methods were and like where your data came from, and like all of that's like something a lot of scientists like should and like all often do like work really hard to make sure their research is as clear and as possible, so that there's none of those like big question marks of like how did this happen and like things like that. So for sure. So we'll jump back to kind of more the bioinformatics and things like that. So yeah, Nadine, did you have coding experience and stuff kind of going into your master's, or was that something you kind of learned?
No, I learned it. Well? I didn't have any coding experience at all. That was the appeal for me to kind of start this master's in the first place. Like I came from just like a general science background. And I was like thinking, oh, like, should I do like a second degree in computer science or something? Like I really wanted to learn how to code, because near the end of my master's, that's just something I wanted to learn. I felt like there'd be a lot of job opportunities with it for me. So I just kind of looked into graduate programs, and Guelph was the only one that kind of had a bioinformatics kind of suited for people who are beginners. So that was kind of what appealed to me about it. I liked that there was like courses and thesis. And I asked a lot of questions before I started from people at the school and from like people who graduated like on LinkedIn and stuff. A lot of people recommended to take the thesis pathway, where you take some courses and then do a thesis. So I did that. But honestly, in my opinion, I think the courses are very helpful. Like without it, you don't learn. It depends on your advisor, I guess, but it's like you learn a lot from them. You learn all the basics, and you learn a lot of things that you can use for your own project. Because for me, like, I love my advisor, but a lot of it is very, like, she leaves it up to me. So for me to have to kind of figure out everything, it's useful to have had the courses to kind of, like, build up my understanding of everything. So yeah, that's kind of why I did it. And yeah, so learning basics is really important. It's hard to jump into a project without knowing basics, but I think like it gives you a really good like beginner foundation when you start bioinformatics. So
yeah, I agree. I think the master's program sets you up for success with like the courses they have you take at the beginning, for sure, because like people come into that with all kinds of different backgrounds, so it definitely gets everybody on the same page.
Yeah, it's very intimidating because there's some people who are like very good, I found in my year there was people who are like all over the place. A lot of us were beginners though, but a lot of the people who were like expert and like everything was like super easy for them. It was so intimidating to be around them because like you were struggling with just like the basic things and they're kind of like, oh, this is easy, like this is, I already did this in undergrad, like it's not even that hard, like so it's kind of intimidating. You feel a lot of like imposter syndrome and stuff, especially at the beginning. I mean, even throughout, to be honest, but. You kind of just have to not compare yourself to others. Like that's like the biggest thing. And I still do it. Like I'm always comparing myself, but I'm always like stop doing that. Like remember, it's like your path, and like everyone's like different. So yeah, but that's the thing about grad school. Everyone's from different levels, so you have to kind of just like realize that and like not let it affect you.
Yeah, for sure. That's good advice. I definitely think imposter syndrome is kind of overarching grad school theme, no matter where you are.
Oh my God, so true. In my cohort, there's someone who's like in her 40s, has published numerous children's books and was picked up by T Geek to have her book distributed to like grade 1 students across the country. So I'm like, why are you here? Like, we're all like, there's a lot of us who are like my cohort's quite young, so there's a lot of us who are either freshly out of undergrads like me or who just don't have a lot of experience or also don't come from writing backgrounds. So there's a lot of us writing our first big projects in this program. But then there's some people who have published multiple books or have written multiple books and yet can be published. And we're like, okay, we're in classes together. All right.
All right. So I'll ask one more question, same one I asked Maddie. So are there any arts that you're involved with or just that you really like to like consume and
Well, I mean, to be honest, like lately, not so much. But in high school, I really was into theater. Like, I loved it a lot. I did like plays and stuff, and I was part of Sears and things like that. Yeah, I really, yeah. We came close to competing against. Like we kind of like in our school the year that I was in Sears, there was a lot of people who made plays. Our play kind of made it to compete with other schools in Ontario, and then we didn't make it past after that because there's like an art school that we competed against and they obviously beat us, but we did a great job. I was really proud of it. I also was the Wicked Witch of the West in a school play as well, so
oh nice.
I love yeah,
that's awesome.
Theater is fun. Yeah, Les Miserables was like the first like musical that kind of affected me in high school, and then I just kind of like loved it. But I don't know, ever since entering science I haven't really been doing much of that. I just do kind of like school science stuff. But yeah, I appreciate the arts for sure.
That's awesome. Okay, so maybe we'll jump over to the artist side of things now. So Graham, what have you been working on? What are you doing in your master's?
What am I doing? Well, I don't do anything interesting like science, really. But that's not to say that I do not research a lot. Like a whole heck of a lot, because in my program, we take both classes as well as there's the thesis process. And you can kind of choose whatever you want to do for your thesis, whether that's a feature-length novel manuscript, book of poetry, feature-length screenplay, or stage play. Stage play is what I'm doing. Or a hybrid work, or a memoir, or a work of creative nonfiction otherwise. So there's a lot of flexibility within the program. Even if you enter as a fiction novelist and write something creative nonfiction, you can. Or if you enter as a playwright and then you start writing a novel, you can. But in the classes, like there's a lot of discussion in a writer's position in the world, as well as a writer's relationship to craft, and how these two schools of thought are connected and have conversations with one another. Because honestly, you can write about anything. There is no limit to writing. Now, my background is theater studies. That's where I met Sam and Jess, actually, through courses I took through the University of Guelph's theater studies program. And it's really interesting because people can come to theater from all different walks of life. I remember, Sam, you must remember James, who was like joint theater studies and neuroscience. I'm sure there are ways that these two could intersect. And actually, I met someone else at the University of Windsor who has the same double major. So I'm like, okay, apparently theater and neuroscience, it's a combo that goes together like PB and J, apparently. It's not for me. I'm really not a math and science person. I have not learned how to code in my master's. I have also not often excelled at science-based courses. But that's not to say I don't include it in my writing. In my fiction writing workshop last winter, I was tasked to writing, a large, 5,000 word short story that happened 3 times during the semester. So, yep, master's life. And I chose actually to lean back on something that I love to do, which is look at symbolism in a work. When Sam, you were in Professor Troy Huri's scenography class, right? Doing Arvartong?
No, I actually wasn't, because I was taking Judith's acting one.
Okay, so in that we were looking at this opera by Schoenberg, I want to say, Arvartong, which it follows a woman walking through a forest, gradually losing her mind. And it's like 45 minutes, and no two, I think, measures are the same through the entire opera, and it's a very experimental piece. But my lens into it was, where are we? A forest. Okay, let's look up the symbolism of forests. Let's look up the ecosystems of forests. Let's look up what a forest is as an environment. And I used that along with the kind of nightmarish quality of the German opera to create this kind of twisted forest ecosystem and include what are the plants that would be present? What type of forest is this? Where is it located? I created a whole geographical map to figure out the woman's journey through different environments. And she starts in a meadow, and then she goes to a forest, and then she ends up in a thicket. And so it's kind of like going through the progression, but backwards. Because how I was seeing it is she's lost a lover, and so I was viewing it as she was going back in time, reliving her memories through the opera. But it was all portrayed through going from forest to thicket to meadow, and so nature was very much involved in it. So for this short story I wrote, I decided to write in a forest again, and all my characters were animals. So it involved me researching all these different animals. And the fun thing is that there was a place around the corner from where I was living at the time that had metal cutouts of animals on top of their fence posts, just decorative. You can buy them at any garden store. But there was a metal cutout of an owl, a beaver, bears, wolves. There was a rabbit that had jagged teeth, like a Tim Burton looking rabbit. And I looked at all these and I'm like, that's my cast of characters.
Cool.
So the beaver was my main character. I did so much research, so much research. I learned more about beavers than I ever cared to know. I learned that the lodge and the dam are different, and I thought that a beaver dam was just something of a hindrance, but it creates a whole ecosystem that supports aquatic species that live at the water's edge, predators who prey on species who live at the water's edge. And so I was creating this whole world, and I created a world where the rabbits were infected by a human toxin that was turning them into carnivores. And so they were disrupting the ecosystem of the forest because they were just starting to eat everything. And the animals who were not corrupted had to rise up to counter this because rabbits breed like crazy. And so they were creating this whole rabbit army. And yes, this is very fantastical. And yes, I'm taking science and twisting it. But I started by researching the animals who were my characters. And I learned that beavers, have 2-year maturation, a 12-year lifespan. They create, when do they create dams? When do they mate? What are their mating practices? Where do they store food for winter? These sorts of questions. How strong is a beaver lodge? And I used all of that to create all my characters and my conflict. And so I really believe that arts and science can cross over immensely, because as a writer, if you're going to write about a subject, the onus is on you to really know what you're talking about. So all those arts people who are like, oh, I don't do science, I was one of them. And now I'm like, well, no, I need to have a very robust research practice. Whether I'm talking about animals or humans, I need to know what I'm talking about. My current thesis play involves humans, and it's about interpersonal conflict. A lot of what I write is interpersonal conflict. I don't so much focus on writing climate fiction or like a lot of very like scientific. If anything, I look into more social sciences. My current play involves someone dealing with their past traumas and abuse and the family dynamic that's evolved because of that. So I had to look into a lot of psychology, sociology, anthropology studies, more than scientific studies, because it was about trauma resolution and the healing process. And so that's normally what I tend to focus on with my writing. But it was really fun to write about animals and feel like a scientist for once, because I was actually looking up studies on beavers and how they live and how they operate to create the structure of my story. Like the whole narrative structure was informed by my research process, which I have a very robust research practice. My advisor said, okay, you've done enough research, you need to stop now. just write it.
That's fair. I feel like people don't really realize maybe how much research kind of goes into the more like creative writing as well. That's a whole chunkier process that people don't realize exists.
It's up to like 40% of the process, because you can get lost in research and finding out all these things, and all these things, like, to the two scientists in the room, or three scientists, I suppose. I should include you in this, Sam. All the work you do, like, my twisted creative mind can absolutely use all of this creating a story. There is no bit of data. Like, you never know what I'm going to be like, that's interesting. Like, talking about viruses and how viruses cross over from animal, or the study of viruses and diseases crosses over from animals to humans. There's something there. There's definitely something there that I can see a creative project growing from, and the connection between humans and animals, and I'm there's something percolating already. We'll say that much.
Yeah, just kind of store all the little information you get, and then when next time you're writing, just kind of pull that out. So yeah, are there certain kind of topics you find require more research? Like, does the percentage of the research you do vary, like, depending on certain things you're dealing with, or do you always have such a robust kind of research period?
I think it really depends on the project, because I also in a previous life before theater, I went to culinary school and I've worked as a chef for 5 years. So I'm very experienced with the culinary world. And one day I want to write a book about my experiences, because there's been a lot of weird things that have happened in kitchens and the culinary industry as a whole. And so for that, I'm probably not going to do as much research, because it's more of a memoir piece. So I'm drawing more on my own experience. So there's probably going to be less research there. But I have done a lot of research previously on cooking styles and experiences in the restaurant industry, mental health in the restaurant industry. And these is all going to be woven together into the piece. So I have that experiential knowledge base already. So I'm probably not going to lean too hard into interviewing, researching, adding to my knowledge, because that'll just make the piece too big. And you want to avoid overcrowding an art piece, because if you try and put so much in, people won't get any of it, because there'll be like, oh, you have to pick up this, and every line is important. And, oh, did you remember that throwaway line we said in scene 1 of Act 1? Well, guess what? Scene 3 of Act 3, it's going to come back. Take notes. Like, it's just no, don't do that. But when it comes to interpersonal relationships, especially something that I have not personally experienced, I need to have my research, like, ironclad. I need to know what I'm talking about, because if I'm talking about specifically trauma, as with my thesis, I need to know what is correct. Because if you don't present your material, your story, with respect, you risk offending people. Worse, you risk triggering people. And we don't want that. So there's a line that was written in a play, Serving Elizabeth, which was performed at Stratford this past season by the great playwright Marcia Johnson. It was write what you know, research what you don't. And I really take that to heart because I believe creative writers, with asterisk caveat, like within reason, can write whatever they want. Like, I do not believe that me as a white Anglo-Canadian person could write an Indigenous person's story. That's inappropriate. Absolutely. Like, full stop, end of discussion. Likewise, it's also inappropriate for me to write an immigrant story because I've never immigrated anywhere. When I do, maybe I can write that, but inappropriate. But in terms of, say, beavers, I learned about beavers. I have no idea about beavers, so I researched it and learned about beavers. Or in War of the Worlds, which was put on in fall 2019 as the main stage production, I took an apiculture class and absolutely brought my love of honeybee biology into my writing. I had a character who wrote a monologue based on my own experience with honeybees in grade 4, where the kids, we found a beehive on the playground. Everyone was drawn to it because you're 9 years old, and of course. And I was telling everyone, please stop, just leave the bees alone. Let's tell the teacher, it'll be fine. But one of the kids who was known as a bully decided he was going to take a big piece of asphalt and knock the hive off of the tree. And I was right at ground zero advocating for the bees, being like, please stop. And so he knocks it off the branch. The hive smashes apart. The bees go into a frenzy. A lot of kids get stung. The bully in question got stung 13 times. We'll never forget what he looked like screaming at the face. But despite being right at ground zero, the bees all flew right past me. And I always kind of believe that they knew that I was trying to defend them. But,
beautiful.
Again, that's me being 9 years old. But I brought that into the play, and then for the installation art that went alongside the play, I definitely focused on, it was technology versus nature. I focused on the importance of honeybees. And afterwards, every member of the show got a little card of pollinator plants that they could plant to help honeybee populations, which are dwindling. So I have my scientific niches. But I'll write anything and research. If I don't know something, it can only benefit me to know more. Even if it doesn't show up in the final script or the final manuscript, knowing just gives you that nuance. It gives you that ability to speak and know. I had no idea what the family structure of a beaver was. I thought it was just going to be, there's the parents and there's the kids. No, there's 2 ranks of youngs. There's yearlings and then there's kids. So these are going to be different characters, and I have to write their voices differently. And that is something I learned from research. But it's not something I'm going to lay out in my novel and be like, hey, by the way.
Yeah, you have a lot of the research, and it informs your choices, but you're not necessarily writing it all out for the reader to see. It's more behind the scenes, kind of.
And that's something writing about climate was brought up, and that's something that's been discussed because the University of Guelph is going to be starting, I think, a BFA program of creative writing, and the focus is climate fiction, which climate fiction is interesting because it's very important, but you're writing about something that's on such a huge scale and that moves in such large steps. So you're saying you're looking between 50 years for little changes today to showing impact. It can be 10, 20 years before you see the impact of decisions made. So how do you write something that moves so slowly with urgency? That's a really great question climate writers discuss. But the issue I find with climate fiction, writers specifically, not the writing, the writers, is that they want their works to be treated with the same respect that environmental science papers receive. And they are different. I think they're different, and I think that there are people who would not be able to read environmental science papers and understand it and comprehend it and apply what's being said. But these people could read a novel that tackles the same issues, but in a more approachable way. I think creativity, the role of the writer, is to make something that seems arcane and abstract and make it relatable. Make it something that you want to read when you're in the bathtub with a glass of red wine, or before bed, before you go to sleep, or just because you are relaxing in the park and you bring your book. That's the role of the writer for me. Then theater artists, that's something completely different.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you have any advice for anyone who's kind of looking to, maybe wants to try to start writing or getting involved in that field?
I'd say there are a lot of great resources you can find if you do not know the principles of writing, if you don't understand how to write narrative. There's a lot of great books. There's so many classes offered. A lot of them you don't even have to pay for, through libraries, through university continuing ed programs. You can focus on whatever genre you want. But ultimately, just read. If you want to start writing, like what you want to start writing, just start reading. And naturally, if you're going to get into creative nonfiction, that will involve a very specific research process. But fiction writers and playwrights, we need our research as well. And I really want to extend appreciation to the scientists in the room, because you're doing the work that us creatives can't do. And you're making it something that we can read, gain insight from, and bring into our writing, so that our writing can be a more approachable version of what you do, which is very important, but something that can get the information out there to more people. So read what you like to write. If you like young adult fiction, read young adult fiction. Read a lot of it, so that eventually you'll start picking up, what do these writers do? And then maybe I can try that. And don't be afraid to fail, because I am on my third draft of my thesis. I have changed it immensely from what I thought it would be. Don't be afraid to get your hands dirty. To quote a writer who I can't remember the name of right now, but the waste paper basket, it was made by God for you, the writer. It is just you and the blank page. No one needs to know that you're writing absolute garbage. No one needs to know. But eventually you'll keep working on it. And eventually it won't be garbage, and you'll be like to your friends, hey, you want to read this story I read? And so that's my big advice. Read a lot, and don't be afraid to fail.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice. And I just want to say, too, yeah, you're like, oh, like, thank you to the scientists. But I think also, like, thank you to the artists as well. Because I'm sure there's lots of scientists who, like, maybe couldn't or wouldn't want to, like, write creatively and do that element as well. Like, I think it's a partnership in two different ways of thinking that both are super valuable and like needed.
And I think that one thing that a lot of scientists lack is an art ability, because one thing that I get really, really frustrated with is like thinking about how to communicate science properly. And a lot of people in the science field don't have a lot of those, how to tell a story kind of background. And I think that that's really useful in communicating science, and in even communicating science like to the public, where we have these really complex topics, and science communication within the community is a really big deal, like writing papers, obviously. But that is our audience, are other scientists. And sometimes we get like stuck in this bubble where there's so much knowledge that's not getting shared. And I think I see like more of a field moving towards like making science more approachable, and like, let's not sit in our labs and never talk about what we're doing and just keep it under like just not tell anyone about it. Like, we want to spread the information. That's the point of doing research. But we really do need artists' help to spread knowledge in a way that's memorable to a general population, and to spread knowledge in a way that, like, I don't know, appeals to people's humanity in a sense. Exactly what Graham was saying about like climate change research. You can write a paper about it, like a scientific paper about it, and it could be like really hard hitting. There has been so many scientific papers written about climate change, and it's still not hitting. But then you get some kind of like novel about climate change, or novel about a big issue, and then people start reading it and passing and sharing this information, and it kind of, if it appeals to like more of their humanity in a way that, you know, factual science doesn't. I find it will stick with them a lot and like inspire a lot more change. Even like, yeah, I guess even like making documentaries, even though they're informational, they're still like very much like this is a story. And I feel like they're a lot more hard hitting than just publishing a paper. So in the way that you appreciate scientists for doing the research, like I think I super appreciate like artists and storytellers for helping tell stories and spread words, because I certainly don't know how to do that.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's been, yeah, like you mentioned, like a big push within science to work on like that communication aspect, or even just you see a lot of like social media lately too, just the people like doing their best to kind of get the word out. They don't want it to be behind like that kind of wall or feeling inaccessible. Making it available to everyone is really important. So maybe we'll jump over to our last artist. So hello, Jess.
Hello.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing in your master's and what you're working on?
Yeah, so I'm gonna give a little bit of like context. So I graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in Theater and Performance from the University of Waterloo, and I graduated right when the pandemic hit. So my focus was very much live events, hosting, helping produce festivals and performances, and helping with front of house, like very much live events. And it made me pause for a year, not having a kind of context to be able to go into these places that I wanted to work, because they just didn't exist. So I spent time really waffling between what I wanted to do, and eventually I found a program in Germany. And so I just sucked up the courage and I moved there, and I am working on my master's now. And so expanded media, gosh, it's such a broad topic. When you hear expanded media, you're like, what is that? And like, I don't even know. I kind of just went into this program. I was like, that sounds cool. Maybe it can expand my media skills to somehow do performance structures. And so my focus is actually on story worlds. So the whole idea is, how do you create user-centric, audience-focused experiences? So, and it's not, it's basically listening to what audiences want and what people want, and trying to find a creative way to tell it in a story on multiple platforms. So it can be virtual reality, augmented reality, Instagram filters, live performance, and whatever is mixed in between. So it really is kind of what you make out of it. The best way I can explain it is this program really trains you how to do design thinking, to create concepts that you can pitch to then game companies, for all these things that you've said of like, how do you communicate science? Maybe they would hire someone from expanded media to create a user-centered way of communicating science to those things. So it's kind of like bridging the gap between digital art and what audiences want. So my goal was to go into this program with somehow turning theater into immersive theater, but also expanding my horizon from performance art, because I have more of my focus in acting. So a lot of the work we're doing is kind of expanding my toolkit of like, how do I create experiences that people want to learn and want to enjoy and want to have access on multiple different platforms. I think that explained it fairly well. It's one of these things that is it moves a lot, and it changes between the terms and what people are interested in. It's a very international program, and it really bases on like who you're working with, and like a lot of the people are from various different countries, various different skill levels. Kind of similar with Graham, with like there's a lot of professional people who are in this program. And you're like, why are you here? But then it's also nice to see that like there are people who also don't know what they want to do, but they think that immersive technology can kind of bridge the gap. I'm not science-based. I'm not technical-based. Like I'm a super practical person that like wants to be like rolling on a floor somewhere with stories. And then I was like, well, I can't roll on a floor anymore. I don't know what to do. So I guess I'm going to learn how to roll on a floor virtually. Like, I don't know. So that's kind of where I've been searching, like treading water, like what am I doing here? Like I never intended to necessarily do a thesis. Like I never wrote a bachelor's thesis. I just performed in a play. I performed and then they're like, great, good job. I'm like, that's it? I don't have to write anything? They're like, here's an article, here, read it. I'm like, okay. And then that was it. Like there was like I swear I didn't get any supplementary like readings, like it was super broad. So I'm kind of going in of like I was thinking of skirting the thesis, but then it's just a paper that you just work on, and if you have the topic you really love, that's where I'm going. So I'm gonna somehow do immersive theater in some way. That's my goal. Yeah, I think imposter syndrome. I feel like it's one of those things of just feeling like you have no idea what's going on, and it's just like I don't have any experience researching really. I'm very much give me a text, I'll memorize it, and then I'll figure it out along the way. And this is kind of summarizes what I think my program is, and doing graduate work is I don't know, but I'm trying to find tools to help me get there. And a lot of the work we're doing is very practical, very like this summer we're the brief is like a Midsummer Night's Dream festival, immersive festival. We're like, okay. And then we're going to be creating exhibits somehow. Oh, cool. So that's the brief, an immersive something. So this can be like augmented reality, mocap, projection mapping, immersive like it's broad. So I think especially like what I'm learning now, especially with being in a really broad program, that it is what you make it. I haven't been like I wanted to try a little bit of screenwriting, and so I did a couple scripts throughout my process, or I have some experience in acting, so I've actually done some voice acting for other people's projects. So I'm kind of keeping theater and keeping those skills of storytelling while I'm working along. So I found that it's very fluid, and I think these kinds of things are just following where your interests are and just trying out. And I really like how Graham talked about just like it's okay to have a fear of failure, but you just do it anyway. And like, yeah, I think that's kind of something I'm very scared of, but it's something that there has to be some kind of risk in any kind of creative thing you're doing. So yeah, I feel like from a practical level, I'm very much not as like centrally focused on one specific thing as an artist, especially right now. So I'm kind of just put in a very practical, maybe righty, maybe acty bucket of immersive expanded somethings. I hope that is acceptable there.
Yeah, no, of course. No, that all seems really interesting and definitely like, yeah, suitable for the times, like kind of adapting to more some of the more virtual aspects and things like that.
It's definitely intimidating. Like there are a lot of people who know like virtual reality and coding and all these things. So like I'm kind of on the periphery of all these going, do I do that? How do I? Because a lot of the time so far I've been like the writer of the group, manager of the group, and then there are other people who can do the physical implementing. So I think it's learning where your strengths are in these like interdisciplinary teams and kind of like supplementing each other with that. So I'm kind of figuring out where that place is in like the workforce of like creating experiences where like you have a team of international artists that can support each other. That's kind of where I'm going, that I might not necessarily be like a leading researcher or creator of one thing, but help support organizations that work to, just I think a lot of it is giving people solace to just go through difficult times, because I have watched so much Netflix and read lots of books and these things, and I think you're right in terms of there has to be so much art, there has to be so much like Graham, would you like to say something?
Yeah, finish your point though. Finish your point.
Oh, okay. There has to be like, especially now, just interdisciplinary learning and appreciating what people can do, because you need storytellers as much as you need people to collect data. It has to be both. And I'm kind of at this mix of somewhere in the middle of trying to create these things and make them work, but I'm undefined yet. And I think being undefined is scary, but it's also something where I think the world will, maybe this is like too like positive thinking, but I think the world will find a place for me in terms of where I can do these things depending on need. So there's a part of me that just trusts that depending on the people I meet, I'll go where I'm needed to kind of fill that gap. So yeah.
I think that's a great way to look at it, to think about it.
Graham?
Yeah.
So there's something that I heard of like in the early days of the pandemic, but I ramble about this like crazy.
Oh, do tell.
So it was something put out by the UK government, and I want to say it was like the finance minister or someone high up posted saying like artists should retrain because of the pandemic. They should retrain to digital or non-physical skills so that they can work and like, yeah, I guess essentially like the whole message was that artists are not essential and we are not valuable, so we should go to do something that is valuable, like finance, law, marketing, business of some kind.
Yeah, I'm wondering the kind of backlash that man got.
I don't think
and also infographics where it's like, here are essential workers, here are non-essential workers, and artists were listed as non-essential. Okay, excuse me. You said you watched so much Netflix during the pandemic, as most of us did. Who do you think makes your Netflix? Not you specifically, the proverbial. Like people in these times lean on artists for everything. Who do you think designed the desk that you're sitting at, or the computer that you're working on? Who do you think made the Netflix you're watching? Who designed the bed you sleep on? Who designed the couch that you are lazing on, complaining about not being able to go out? Who made the art that you hang on your walls? Who wrote the books that you're reading?
It's all life enrichment, creating these things that are just so soul filling. Like, it's soul food. Like, when you have like the basic necessities of life, there's a point where like now there's so many people who we don't need to all go hunting for food now. And there's a point where even then in these times we're all like, what do we do now that like food is cooked and like, oh, I don't know. Oh, hey, there's a funny shadow on the wall. Haha, let's all go watch that. And it becomes like this huge bonding experience with people. Like, one thing I've really seen within this program so far is just like stories are central to everything. We're telling stories to each other now. This is something, when you're in the car and you're talking about like a breakup or some, moral quandom you're thinking of, it's always telling a story to other people, and people are always engaged in wanting to know, what happened next. So it's kind of taking these like natural things of like people being curious and having so many emotional what is this like needing to express these things that it has to go somewhere, and not everyone runs and researches and like that there's other ways to do that. And I think storytelling, like when I do have a lot of doubts about like of where I'm going, because I am kind of fluid in where I am at the moment as an artist, stories are always the thing where I'm like, but there has to be storytellers. There has to be someone by a fire. And like, it doesn't always mean that I have to be an actor on a stage to do that. It can be providing a structure, framework that someone can then take and make something out of it. Like it can be in so many different ways. And I think
digital immersive poetry is a really fascinating art form. Highly recommend you look into it.
Oh, do you have an example of this, or?
Not offhand, but I
Cool.
will afterwards. I have a friend who has a lot of them, and they've been great.
Okay, cool. Like even that, you see, I didn't even know that existed, but people are creating these venues of communication to fill these things, to just try it out, which is so important. Like, I don't know where we're gonna go like with technology in the next 50, 100 years, but like they're gonna serve some ways with storytelling, whether it's science or arts or something else entirely. So it's kind of been like the central thing. And yeah, go.
As soon as you create a new technology, I'm pretty sure artists will always look at how can I make stories with this. Like as soon as Zoom came about and became so prolific, Zoom theater immediately happened. I did research on the University of Windsor's Zoom Theater Festival. They completely pivoted their festival from in-person to originally written Zoom plays. And I was doing research on that about how the audience experienced those. But if you have a new technology, and I think that your master's is going to really help benefit you like future proof you in a way is that you'll be able to look at these new digital forms and think, how can a story, like, there's a story here, and every medium has its best ways to be applied for storytelling, because there's always a story that can be told.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's also this thing of like, you know, everything has to be digital, everything has to be online, and I think it's going to be more powerful when it's mixed. Like everyone's like, oh, we have to do always Zoom plays. We always have to, like, one example I have is there's a performance called Sensory Box. And I signed up for this. I was like, okay, it's on Zoom. I don't know, Sensory Box, cool. And they literally sent you a little box just filled with random stuff. And throughout the performance, there was the performer at a desk in the theater or in the wherever they were, and they had all these other desks, other people, so physical participants, like with social distancing and everything, so you could hear the people in the room with him, and you saw the participants online who were doing it as well. So it was like everyone was still connected, even though there was an in-person's part, in presence and online, and you had your own box, so it was like you're physically still participating in your own world with these things. So it like there are so many ways that you can meld them, and I think you can't always take away the physical part of who we are. I don't think everything will always be virtual, because there's still like the amount of joy everyone has about like, oh, we're gonna do like in person this time. Like it's so like we want to be with other people. Like I don't
we are
think
social creatures.
Yes, yeah. So I it will be interesting to see where this goes, because I think there's so much to be said for people wanting to connect in various ways with interesting future, you know, metaverse kind of thing, but also still in person. Like we've been deprived of that for 2 years. So I think it's going to have to be mixed in with real life. So we'll see how that technologically advances pretty soon. But yeah, there's a huge importance for both.
Yeah,
I think like what this whole conversation that you have been having about the kind of evolution of stories along with the evolution of technology in biology fields, we talk a lot about that as well, like the evolution of biology research, I guess, coinciding with technology, and how even like Sam, Nadine, and I were all learning bioinformatics because that's where the technology is taking us. So Jess, in kind of like a parallel to you trying to learn like virtual, like how do we implement media into technology, I feel like that's kind of also what we're doing. Like how do we implement computers into biology as opposed to just being like little biologists in the field. So it's funny how like parallel this conversation is to conversations that I have so often with biologists when we talk about technology.
And it's nice to hear, because like one thing, like I don't think these departments, these disciplines should be siloed. Like it just feels like, oh, if you're in biology, you must stay there forever. Like no, not at all. Neuroscience can be with theater as well. Like who knows? Like I watched a show like, I don't know, 5 years ago, where it was all about like the theories of physics. It was a crazy opera in person. It was crazy, but they had a whole section of just like scientists, and there's one lady who literally had a whole monologue about Schrodinger's cat, and it was like, she had like this whole wall of like physics and written and all these things, and she was explaining Schrodinger's cat, and it related to the plot somehow. I don't remember. Then there was singing, but like
then there was singing.
Yeah, it was a little like crazy, but super cool. It was called Entangled, which I think really fits like with the whole theme. But anyway, like why aren't there more things like this like intertwined? Because then people who are like, there were scientists who actually came to the show because there was science, and they're like, whoa, I didn't think that could happen. And we're like, neither did I. That's pretty cool. Like, why can't we have more Schrodinger cats in plays? Like, you know, things like that of like, they have to communicate, because then it opens up this whole other world of possible venues for people to connect. Like, I just think it's kind of natural to blend these things. It's just, you have to have like the right people in the room to start blending them together. And that's kind of like what I think you're doing with this podcast, is just trying to break down those kind of silos, which I think is really, really cool, because there has to be more venues for conversation with this. I think it's so valuable for learning and just in practice. So yeah, glad to be a part of it.
And if I could quickly hop in, I think that anything can be made into a play, a book of poetry even. Like, if you look at a subject like bioinformatics and say, oh, like that's science, that's nothing to do with art, you're not being creative enough. Like, clearly you're not paying attention, because everything I've heard, like just learning that one scoop of animal fecal matter has like 1 million different bacterial organisms.
It's
I had
crazy.
no idea. No idea. And I will never forget that now. I will never look at poop the same way. Thank you, Maggie, for that. Or I think about with Nadine, your research in like DNA errors. Like, I want to know more, because I'm curious about how this can be used creatively. Because I mean, we all know that like science fiction is super popular, and the idea of like, I think my closest association, which is probably wrong, but I think about like all the work on gene splicing and cloning, which of course has to have a background in DNA work. So my creative juices are flowing right now. And I think and I've even worked on a podcast that was a joint between theater studies and the Department of Geography at Guelph.
Wow.
And I had no idea you could put these two together. It was all about food security. And you think that food security is something that's super dry and super boring. But what do? We created a post-apocalypse where there was a climate crisis and food was like at an all-time low. But then there's a community up north, which in Ontario would be around Tobermory, that managed to perfect food production, storage, and distribution. And their people are fine. But they put up this huge wall to protect themselves against marauders and people who would try and just steal their food. So they've been secluded for the past 50 years. And then the question becomes, do we open up and share our secrets with the people who are starving outside, or do we just take care of our own? And it was a whole podcast that explored the scientists who created the technology that allowed for vertical farms. And they went joint, like part and parcel, with podcasts created by geography master's students about agriculture, food distribution, food production, all these subjects that you think are so boring and dry. But we made a 10-episode miniseries that tackled all of these issues, 2 episodes per subject. So if you're a creative person listening to this and you're thinking, well, art and science are just two diametrically opposed poles, you are not being creative enough. I will call you out. You are not creative enough, because science is so rich, and if you understand your world, you can write creatively better, because what is art if not reflecting the world we live in? And if you're just trying to reflect your lens on the world, and that means like just the human lens, you're not being creative enough. You're not thinking in how animals see the world, or you're not thinking about what it means that human researchers sacrifice animals for science, to understand the world, to understand humanity. But what is it like to be those animals? What would it be like to write poems from the perspectives of those animals? Just ask more questions, be more creative, because this world needs radical creativity.
I love that. Yeah. And yeah, a little plug for the Haven project. It's on Apple Podcasts and things. You can hear Graham and I's voices if you want.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome.
But yeah, maybe we'll head over to like the last section of the podcast now. So thank you all so much for sharing your ideas and talking about what you're passionate about and what you're working on. Now it's the point where we try to combine those together and create something new. So I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to come up with anything creative. It can be a play, like an art piece, skit, like just a pitch for something, whatever you would like, that communicates or shows some aspect of the science we've discussed using the skills of the artist. And I'm going to actually go away for 10 minutes and come back, and then you can surprise me with what you have.
Okay.
Oh my God.
Mission accepted.
Yeah, and I'm setting a timer, so I will be back in 10 minutes.
Okay.
But I'll leave you to it. Unless there's any questions before I go.
I think we got this.
Okay, I believe in you. I think you got
it.
Okay. All right.
My hands are sweating.
You're gonna have to help us on the sciencey part. We can package it in any way you want, but you have to, maybe you guys can decide what would be a good drama ensued research idea.
Honestly, I think it would be so delightful to have a play that is about pig poop.
And then everyone's poop has its own virtual reality.
Like, what will your poop reveal about you?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
oh my
Immerse in your poo.
Immersive feces coming soon.
Yeah, I like the idea of creating a virtual space for the audience to walk through, because I think that's also a way that makes the science more approachable when you can see it physically. Rather than just trying to think it and conceptualize it, you actually see it presented.
You can barcode different species, and that's so cool. Does it
Right.
actually look like a little scanner? Like,
just like a certain part of the DNA that you know for a fact is it's like the same within all species, but like different within different species. So, like that could be something like that. So, there's something like that for bacteria actually. So that could work.
One of them's like super serious and hardcore, and the other one is like, yeah, whatever, I study poop all day. What do you want from me?
I don't know if that
that's
makes sense.
so cool.
That makes so much sense. Welcome back, Sam.
Okay, welcome back, Sam. Okay, so this is the idea. Think of immersive Van Gogh. Have you seen that? It's like all the projections in like the room of his art. Okay, you're in an exhibition, all right? And you have been welcomed by these two scientists who are going to be showing you this microbiome scanner thing, right? Okay,
It scans barcodes. It scans
barcodes.
It scans barcodes of microbiome.
Yeah. And you walk in and you get like a little white coat and you're all like with the audience ready to see this like new scanner. And as the drama ensues between your two hosts, you have like a real scientist and then an actor scientist, kind of Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde kind of scenario. And as their conflict kind of goes with trying to show you the best aspects of like this scanner, that like maybe they think different features are better, I don't know. They scan these little pieces of poo, and then like as they scan them, the whole world of the microbiome just like explodes into like a projection of like this little world, and each one has its own little world with different characters, and you get to see how like each character and their conflicts with each other in this little world mirrors the conflict between the scientists, and the core is like how they're not so different from the fecal matter of pigs, because everyone has a heart and
everybody poops.
Yeah.
And it's always more beneficial when schools of thought collaborate, because just like the bacterial worlds that are all working together for different functions, we have to all collaborate as well.
Yeah, moral rainbows, moral of the story.
10 minutes, not bad.
Learn about scanning DNA. Woo, 10 minutes and poo.
Perfect. I love it. Do you have a title? Like, does it have a title, a name?
Yeah. Did we come up with anything?
We got to digital immersive experience, and then we stopped.
Shooting the shit.
Ooh. Shooting the shit. Scanning microbiomes and your drama.
Yeah.
Perfect. I love it. That'll be the episode title as well.
I love that.
Oh, and we forgot that the scientists actually scan their own poo in like a huge rage of like, oh, you can't, like, they have this huge conflict and they scan each other's, and then you get to see the inner turmoil of each scientist.
Yeah, I think I came in just at the end of that one. That was the first thing I heard when I re-entered here was the scanning of each other.
Sam was like, of course we went with poop.
I'm like, I kind of figured that would be perhaps a reoccurring theme.
So shooting the shit, scanning microbiomes and your drama, the immersive experience.
Yes!
I'll write it down.
That might be too long of a title, but anyway.
Well, thank you so much for coming up with your ideas and sharing what you're working on and all of that. And thank you so much for being on the episode. I definitely think it was a lot of fun.
It was so fun.
So before we go, is there anything that any of you would like to promote or plug? And I'll make sure to put links to anything in descriptions and stuff as well, if you have anything you want people to go look at or check out or anything. No.
I have Twitter. I have academic Twitter.
Perfect.
Academic Twitter. I mean, you can follow me on Instagram at JessBeShortAndGolden, where we will be posting various immersive content, hopefully, for the projects I'm doing. You can also take a look at, I will send you the link, Sam, Hadaya's Hochschule Darmstadt has a bunch of projects page, and one of the projects we have worked on, so you can just see a little bit of what this program in Germany is doing for immersive experience. So.
Awesome.
All I have is Twitter. My Twitter's at Maddie Arsenault. And that's it. Like, trying to get a following.
I will follow you.
Thanks.
And my Instagram is at Instagram999, spelled like my name. Follow me if you're inclined. I very rarely post, but when I post things about theater I'm making, that's where I'll be posting.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Yeah, I don't have much else. I just have my Instagram, so it's my name, NADIN_IBR.
Awesome. I'll do a little plug for something that Graham and Jess are also a part of. For our Shot in the Dark, it's our radio show that Graham directed, and Jess is the voice actor on, that you should go listen to. And I'll put links to that.
Please go see a Shot in the Dark. It's full of beautiful space adventures. Please go take a listen.
It was so much. It's so much fun. You won't be disappointed.
It's very fun. It's very good. It's a sci-fi mystery adventure on Pluto. So definitely check that out. All right. So I'll include links to all of that in the description. But yeah, I just want to thank you all again for being here. And thank you to anyone who might be listening. And with that, I guess we'll wrap up the episode. So until next time, bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.